Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the session on nature play. I'm Helen Tovey, and I'll be chairing the session this morning. And I'm joined by our three presenters, Julia Dixon, Louise Strong, and Kate Razzall. I think this is a very timely session, as you know, we've all found a renewed appreciation for nature during the various lockdowns. Not just a place for exercise, but a place of inspiration, of joy, harmony, calmness, solace. So how we relate to and engage with nature has got renewed focus. But of course, we're also in the midst of a climate emergency and alarming decline in biodiversity. And they present huge challenges for us all. So I think Froebel's ideas on children's engagement with nature, connectedness, ecology, that we're all part of nature, have renewed an urgent impetus. And we know that so many children are disconnected from the natural world with declining and very unequal opportunities to play outdoors. So your presentations today are very timely and relevant to the challenges we face today. So I'm very pleased to introduce our first speaker, Julia Dixon. Julia's from the Inclusion and Wellbeing Service in West Lothian. She's going to talk on forest play. Over to you, Julia.
Thank you. So my name is Julia Dixon. I'm a teacher for the Inclusion and Wellbeing Service in West Lothian, and my job is really to support children with additional support needs in their mainstream schools. Just to give you a wee bit of context to begin with for this project, it really came about when I signed up to do the Froebel and Childhood Practice course through Murray House, part of Edinburgh University. And at that time that I signed up, I was working as a teacher within an ASN nursery. And just after I signed up, I changed my job across to my current role. And that change in job sort of changed my perspective a wee bit, because Froebelian practice is really well established in the nursery settings. But I was discovering that as I started to go up the school, I was seeing less of his influence. And it just got me thinking about the relevance of Froebelian practice to older children as well as younger. Now, emotional well-being, we've already heard quite a lot about that today, and it's such a huge focus for everybody anyway, let alone just now with the crazy times that we're living in. But it's always been a key component of what the Inclusion and Wellbeing Service focus on. And this survey from NHS England was one that really stood out for me. And they conducted a series of surveys between 1999 and 2017. And during the course of that survey, they found that there was a rise in the number of children being diagnosed with mental health conditions. So that by the time we got to 2017, they found that 1 in 8 children between the ages of 5 to 19 had at least one diagnosed mental health condition. And as the Young Minds organisation points out on their website, that equates to roughly 3 children in every classroom. And in fact, I read an article yesterday on the news that's suggesting that that figure has gone up again with the pandemic. Now, this is part of a wider trend. So Childline, for example, reported a 36% increase in children seeking support for serious mental health issues. And similarly, the NSPCC found that there was a rise of 8% over 4 years in the number of children receiving counselling for serious mental health issues. Now, the Child and Adult Mental Health Service in Scotland commissioned a report to look at their own provision. And within that report, they state that the majority of adult mental health problems begin in childhood, with 50% of mental health problems established by the age of 14. So not only are we seeing this trend with this rise in children being diagnosed with mental health conditions, But what CAMHS are saying is that actually for adults who have a mental health condition, it started in childhood, and for a lot of adults it started quite early on in childhood. Now, within the UK, when we think about education and society, most children begin their formal learning between the ages of 4 and 5, and that's quite early on comparatively. So Europe, for example, children don't tend to start formal learning until age 6, and in some of the Scandinavian countries and in Canada, they don't usually start formal learning until age 7. And there's a lot of research on this. David Whitebread, for example, from Cambridge University is very well published. But it was this study from Kern and Friedman that really stood out for me, I think because they use quite clear language. But they say that to their knowledge, every study ever conducted has shown that the academic advantage of an early start washes out by the teenage years, while social and emotional disadvantages linger on indefinitely. And they went on to say early school entry was associated with less educational attainment, worse midlife adjustment, and an increased mortality risk. Now we know that a key Froebelian principle is the importance of play, particularly free play, particularly active outdoor play. And the data and the research that's coming through is showing this very clear picture of how this type of active outdoor play is really beneficial for children's emotional well-being. So in 2011, Floyd et al. Found that children who engage in active outdoor play in natural environments demonstrate resilience, self-regulation, and develop skills for dealing with stress later in life. So 3 really critical skills that we want children to develop, emerging from opportunities to engage in this type of play. The Scottish Government in 2018 published their Out to Play guidance, and at the start of that they list all the benefits associated with playing outdoors, and I'll let you read through that quote yourselves because it's quite lengthy. But again, you can see some really critical skills that we want children to develop coming from opportunities to engage in active outdoor play. The Canadian government, Canada, often one of the world leaders in terms of education, they say that access to active play in nature and outdoors with its risks is essential for healthy child development, essential. And they go on to recommend increasing opportunities for it across the board. So that's really where my first play group kind of came from. I wanted to target children between the ages of 4 and 7 who will be starting that formal learning journey in schools. All of the children who participated in the group had already been referred to our service, so they therefore had an additional support need. And they were then in turn referred by my colleagues who were working with these children, who identified them as children who were really struggling with that formal indoor learning environment and would benefit from opportunities to engage in active outdoor play. Now, as you can imagine, the logistics of trying to organise a group like this across the authority were quite challenging. And one of my concerns was that in order for the children to be able to participate, the schools would have to pay for a taxi to come to take them from school to the location of the group and back again, along with an escort or a familiar adult. So that has a staffing implication potentially for the schools, and it also has quite a high cost implication for them at a time when budgets are already quite tight. So I felt like it was a really big ask for the schools, and I was concerned it would act as a barrier and that children wouldn't be able to participate because of the money associated with it. So I applied to the Froebel Trust, and we were successful in gaining some funding from them, and that money was used to help offset those costs so that we reduced that barrier and that more schools were able to participate and more children were able to participate in the group. When it came to implementing it, my first steps was really to go and speak to somebody I knew who had a lot of experience with working with children in natural environments. She was forest skills trained, and she gave me some really useful practical advice and helped me with templates for risk assessments, things like that. And that really gave me the confidence and the skills to move forward with this project. So I would say if anybody like me is wanting to do something like this, but maybe struggling to figure out how to do it, definitely go and tap in to the knowledge of friends and colleagues who've got more experience, because that information was invaluable and it really helped to get this project off the ground. In terms of resources, we weren't too heavy on resources. I purchased a couple of pieces of tarpaulin and some string, and as you can see from the picture, it made a very adequate tent. I also stole a fluffy rug from my house, which the children used to like to carry because it was nice and warm, and we put that on the inside of the tent just to make it a wee bit homelier. We had some mindfulness colouring sheets and pens in the tent as well for anybody that wanted a mindful moment. And my colleagues donated some children's books, nothing too heavy because we're having to carry it through to the woods, but just a few light books. And it was quite interesting to see how children who were reported in their mainstream schools as not really engaging with stories and literacy in that environment were much more engaged with it when they were out in the woods in the tent, asking adults to read them stories or flipping through the pages with a friend. That was quite a nice element. We also had some cocktail sticks and marrowfat peas to build some sculptures, like 2 really for billion. And that was a really good one in terms of resilience because they break so easily, and it was lovely to see the children working together to create something and sharing what they'd done, taking photos of their sculptures at the end. That was a very popular activity. And I also wanted to have some wooden blocks again to be really Froebel. We had some wooden blocks which I initially borrowed from my 5-year-old, but after speaking to West Lothian Council, they very generously bought us our own set. Again, nothing too heavy, but something that we could easily carry into the woods with us, that we had inside the tent for the children to engage with if they wanted to. When it came to planning, it was really important to me that the children had a clear voice throughout this experience and that they were able to shape it and direct it. So for that reason, we used floor book plans. And I've put a wee example in the photos there, so hopefully you get a flavour of the kind of conversations that were going on with the children. I was worried when I introduced them that the children wouldn't want to engage with the floor books, but that certainly wasn't the case. Children who were reported again in school as not really engaging with their learning, not ever wanting to put pen to paper, so to speak, they really engaged with this process, and actually being able to share their ideas, have them documented and then action the following week became a really important element of this group. It worked really, really well. I can't think of a single child who didn't engage with the floor books, which was lovely. I've put in this quote here: play is the highest level of child development. And obviously Froebel is talking about the importance of play and how it is this integrating mechanism. But whenever I read this quote, it always makes me think about some of the wee ones that I work with who don't necessarily have the same play skills as a lot of their peers, and who really struggle with play because it's not predictable and they don't understand the expectations. So alongside our floor book planning, we had some adult-led plans to begin with as well, just so that there was an adult guide there to help the children who needed it. And I absolutely stand by that. I think it was the right decision. There were children who depended on that adult role model to begin with. But what we found was that as the weeks went by and the children gained in confidence and they developed relationships with the other children and their play skills developed, very naturally that adult-led planning died away, and it was the floor books that took off and directed everything, which again was really nice. Managing risk was probably the thing I was most worried about in terms of taking this group forward. So we had a very robust risk assessment in place very robust, and it was actively shared with a lot of people at the start. But as Froebel says, it is the boy who does not know his strength and the demands made on it who is likely to venture beyond his experience and run into unsuspected danger. And as always, Froebel is absolutely right. So self-risk assessing became another important element for the group. And rather than me saying to the children, don't do that, that's not safe, we would say things like, how can we change that to make that safer? What can we do differently? And we would have conversations with the children, and they really engaged. And I'll be honest and say hand on heart, I wasn't sure. I was keen to implement this, but I really wasn't sure as to how effective it would be. But it really did work. The children really engaged with that. They thought about what they were doing. They engaged in those conversations. At no point did children put themselves at risk. And by the end of it, you know, they had developed a really important life skill. Again, they were able to assess for themselves what was too risky and what was safe to do, and take that forward, which was fantastic. In terms of impact, I did issue lots of questionnaires in lots of different formats, but I wasn't very lucky in getting many questionnaires returned. So most of my feedback is anecdotal feedback, oral feedback from parents, children, schools and staff, but it has all been really positive. And obviously my own observations and those of my colleagues as well have fed into that. But schools were asking to extend the blocks, they were asking to send more children, they were asking for more blocks. Quite recently we had, I was talking to a member of the management team from one of the schools who had participated, and she was saying that she'd been in class and that the children were asking when the group was going to be starting up again because they had really enjoyed it and they were missing it. So that was really lovely feedback to have. One of the comments from a lot of the adults actually who joined us was that when you were out in that environment, you saw how low a lot of the children's resilience levels were. And I think that was definitely true. And I remember one of the first weeks, a wee boy, his feet were cold, and it made him really angry, the fact that his feet were cold and he had more control over that and he didn't know what to do about it. He was furious. But we had a conversation about strategies to warm up and get his feet going, get the blood going through his body, and he got past it. And it didn't become an issue for him for the rest of the sessions. And a few weeks later, another wee boy was getting upset because the cold was nipping at his fingers and he didn't like it, obviously quite painful. But as a group, the children were able to have a conversation about strategies, and they were doing races and things to warm up their bodies. And they worked together and they got past it. And you really saw that resilience start to develop and improve as the weeks went on. You also saw a change in play skills, but also children that I know from working with them were struggling to form relationships in school environments, but when they were outside in the woods and they had the space to move back from situations that they weren't comfortable in, really engaged with their peers and they formed friendships, and the children were making up their own games with rules that they all understood, and they were including each other. And it was really lovely to see how well that worked. We had a few family members and parents join us, which I think for me was probably the most special part of the group. And one mum in particular said that seeing the group had really given her the confidence to take her child out to rural environments, to woodland and country parks and things, which she wouldn't have done before because she was worried that he would run away, or that he would engage in risky behaviour and that he would get hurt and she wouldn't be able to keep him safe. But attending the group and seeing how beneficial it was for him and how he wasn't doing that, he was keeping himself safe, he was listening to instructions and he was really enjoying it, had given her the confidence to try that out with school during holidays and weekends and things. And I think for me, in terms of next steps, that's really where I would like to take the group forward is to involve families more in that activity and hopefully build that confidence and that capacity as well. I've come to the end of my presentation, so I've included a few references here. There's some further reading if anybody's interested in the research behind the group, also in my references as well. But I'd just like to say thank you very much for listening, and I hope that has been interesting.
Thank you very much, Julia. That's a fascinating project, and I'm sure there will be lots of questions for Julia, so do please add them to the Q&A, and we'll pick them all up at the end. So want to move on now to our next speaker, Louise Strong, who's going to talk about a community garden project. So over to you, Louise.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Louise Strong and I'm the Development Manager at NECA. I'm delighted to be here today to tell you a bit about our project and how we've worked with the Froebel Trust over the last 12 months. We don't claim to be experts on the Froebelian principles, however we have been described as intuitively Froebelian in our approach. Over the next 25-30 minutes or so, I am to explain who we are and what we do and how we've made links with the Froebel Trust, and hopefully you'll find what we do interesting. So who are we? We are a North East charity. Let me tell you what we're not. We're not a formal education provider, an academic institution, a school or a registered childcare facility. We are a charity. Our key focus is to improve lives of individuals and communities in the local area. For over 45 years, we've aimed to address health inequalities within disadvantaged populations. We're experienced in managing and developing projects with the aim of building sustainable communities and cultivating community cohesion. The project I'm here to talk about today is our community garden. A garden has been developed over the last 18 plus years to bring people together and build strong relationships across communities. If I were to describe all of the different activities and projects that we've delivered over the years, we'll be here all day. However, to give you some examples, we've delivered holiday hunger clubs in association with Freedom Britain, promoted benefits of gardening for mental health and well-being, has been developed over the last 18 plus years. Like I said, we have offered volunteering and work experience opportunities and provided significant opportunities for learning and development for individuals of all ages and abilities. The garden itself is located in South Shields in the northeast of England. We are near to the coast and not too far from Sunderland and Newcastle. If you can move on. So South Shields is in the local authority area of South Tyneside, an area that has significant deprivation. The Index of Multiple Deprivation, or the IMD, is the official measure of relative deprivation in England. If we can move on. So our garden is located in the Biddick and All Saints ward, which is one of the most deprived areas in the country. The 2019 index reports that South Tyneside has become even more deprived compared to the IMD 2015. Within the 20 local authority districts within the highest portions of income deprivation and employment deprivation, South Tyneside ranks 12th and 6th respectively. It's the 13th local authority district with the highest proportion of children in income deprivation. If we move on, 37.3% of children in our area live in poverty, a figure I'm sure you'll agree is extremely high. The End Child Poverty Report released last year confirms South Tyneside was ranked the third local authority area with the highest increase in child poverty rates after the housing costs between 2014-15 to 2018-19. The locality has seen an increase in child poverty of 10.3% over the last 5 years and is now ranked only behind Newcastle and Middlesbrough, both areas also in the northeast of England. Now you know the type of area we work in, let me tell you a bit about the garden. The garden started with just one allotment plot. Over the years this has been developed and the site now covers a total of 15 allotment plots. You can see the area marked in yellow shows the size that the site covers. You may also be able to see from the image that we're actually positioned in the middle of a housing estate and close to a main road. We also have a huge pylon straddling a part of the garden. It's unusual to find a natural site like ours in these surroundings, which is why the garden has been known locally as Green Hope Oasis. We provide free access to those in the community that need it most. Despite its location, when you're there, it really does feel like you're somewhere completely different, somewhere that many of the children that come have never experienced before. The sound of the road disappears and the pylon becomes invisible. We can move on. It's really difficult to do the garden justice simply by describing it, so I'll be using lots of visuals that will hopefully give you an idea of the resources that we have available to us. We have the usual things you would perhaps expect to find on an allotment site. So we have huge areas of custom-built planting beds, polytunnels for growing flowers, fruit and vegetables. We grow and harvest produce all year round, providing food for our local families and donations to other valuable services, such as our local food bank, which is positioned within close proximity of the garden. We can move on. We have a range of wildlife on site. Obviously, we have a variety of bugs, mini beasts and visiting birds, but we also have a large custom-built chicken coop that currently houses 11 ex-battery hens that were rescued and given a good home. We have wildlife ponds housing frogs and newts, and we have a stream that runs through the length of the garden that is home to a couple of water walls. All things that the children that visit find extremely interesting. And to be fair, not only the children, most of the adults that come absolutely love it too. In addition, we have ample space for children and families to come and play both indoors and outdoors. We've grown willow all around the garden that creates natural sectioning of different areas and has been structured into tunnels and play spaces. We've created a stage and seating area, making a focal point for families to gather, and we've installed a custom-built learning hut that provides a large indoor space. Outdoor play equipment has been created from donated and recycled materials. We also have created a small kitchen inside a large shipping container, which allows us to provide light refreshments, but also to prepare and cook some of the produce grown on site. So as I've been going along, I've described features as created or custom built. Everything you see on site has been built by our amazing team. The stage, the chicken coop, the play equipment, all made from donated wood or unwanted materials. If you ever visit our site, the manager Dave will always point out the windows in the wood store hut that were the original windows from his first house. On site, we have woodwork huts, also built by the team, and in these huts, many items have been imaginatively created by both the team and by members of the community. New skills have been learned, developed, and passed on in these wood workshops. Lots of the items created can be found across the site, but some are also sold to provide much needed funds for the garden. These include planters, bird box, bird tables, and lots of seasonal items like willow Christmas trees. The team have adapted materials to make woodwork an activity that can be enjoyed by visitors of all ages and all abilities. For example, by creating simple versions of bird boxes that children can build, or smaller versions of willow trees that the preschool children can put together. So, who is this amazing team that I'm describing? They are the real strength of our garden. Their dedication and commitment to the garden and to all the families that use it is second to none. They devote their time to the garden completely. They are a huge asset to our project. And likewise for many of them, if not all, the garden is a lifeline for them. So, after discovering the Froebel Trust via local literature circulated around charities based in the South Tyneside area, we were able to recognise how the work we had already done at the garden could evidence and support the views that Froebel's principles remain relevant and also important today. Over the last 4 years, we've been providing holiday clubs for children of all ages during every school holiday. Whilst the ultimate aim of the clubs has been to address the issue of holiday hunger, our clubs are so much more than that. The garden has been successfully used to enrich school holidays with activities that provide educational and social content in a natural outdoor setting, ensuring learning is not lost during the holidays and providing families and children access to experiences that they would not otherwise be able to have. This has included learning new skills in gardening and woodwork, arts and crafts, taking part in physical activities, both naturally through movement around the garden and also by taking part in activities and games. Learning about caring for wildlife and understanding food cycles and nutrition. Not only did we identify links with Froebel in the work we were doing, but we could also identify a shared ethos of the Trust. Our organisational values are integral to all of our services, and we believe that they are congruent with the principles promoted by the Trust. Respect. We listen and communicate directly and openly. We value diversity. Integrity. We do what is right, not what is easiest. Partnership. We achieve our best when working together. Quality. We challenge ourselves to deliver the highest quality of service. Commitment. Commitment comes to life through passion in what we do. As individuals and as an organisation, we create value. And empowerment. We work with people as unique individuals. We could already see how we could establish links with Froebel and develop what we had to offer our families with the help of the Trust. At the beginning of last year, we were extremely lucky to receive training from the Froebel Trust. The garden team attended both Element 1 and Element 3 of the Froebel short courses. If you've not yet attended any of these courses, we highly recommend them. As you can probably imagine, our volunteers were understandably anxious about the prospect of attending training with external tutors, and in effect being in a classroom again, something that they hadn't experienced for a significant number of years. I'm sure Stella and Kate will agree when we all first came together on that first morning, there was an air of apprehension and no one knew what direction the planned training days were going to take. But I'm pleased to say the training was a huge success. The volunteer team really embraced the activities over the 4 days that Stella and Kate presented, and strong lasting relationships were formed very quickly with volunteers sharing experiences and ideas throughout. As part of the training, we moved out of the classroom and into the garden. The team explored interconnectivity and forms across the site. They located and examined opposites and searched out the natural shapes that were all around them in the plants and the trees. Just looking at the leaves, stalks and stems that they walked past every day created a renewed excitement and further ignited their natural curiosity about everything around them, appreciating the natural beauty that they get to experience every day. They linked Froebel's gifts and occupations to existing resources on the site and modelled with clay. Ultimately, they had a lot of fun. So what impact did the training have? The training enhanced the approach that the team already had, and although I didn't think it was possible, it made them even more passionate about what they could provide and how they could share that passion for the garden even more to all those that visited. We have got more videos, but I don't know whether we'll be able to have them play.
I don't think we will. We might try and slot the videos in when we do the recording afterwards, Louise. I think when we edit it, we'll see if we can pop the videos in then.
That's fine. I mean, so the videos show the volunteers just explaining how they really appreciated the natural environment and things that could be used within the environment. And each member of the team is now able to look at the garden in a different way, and they've learned that stepping back, observing and reflecting is extremely important. The training also led to some developments to the site itself. On the last day of the training, Stella and Kate challenged the team to build a bug hotel. I'm not sure they were entirely expecting the mammoth creation that came out of the challenge. However, the team demonstrated without thinking their instinctive approach to using materials available to them in their natural surroundings. Alongside the creation of the bug hotel, the training also led to other developments on the site. The team have built 2 substantial mud kitchens along each side of the learning hut. These have been created to use water, clay, mud, sand and any other materials the children can find. Built-in cupboards have been included with doors to open and close and tools to play with and use hang above on the wall. Large water butts collect rainwater to use, and each end has a blackboard panel for children to draw, write or mark as they wish. On the training course, we talked about how there is no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing. And with that in mind, the team have built a small changing hut. In this, we've provided a range of aprons, overalls and wellies, so parents know that whatever the weather, the children can still come and be safe and warm whilst they stay outdoors. This has been particularly beneficial for those families that perhaps couldn't afford to buy these items themselves. The team have also made water walls from recycled materials and made wooden building blocks cut from unwanted or donated wood and styled on Froebel's gifts. And of course, the knowledge from the training was used to develop our Froebel Trust funded project, Mini Muddy Fingers. Local preschool sessions in the area are limited. Those that exist tend to be indoors, short, time-limited, structured, and many have costs associated with them. No other provision offers free opportunities for children to play expressively and creatively in a safe, welcoming and resourceful environment like Mini Muddy Fingers does. The project is aimed at young children up to the age of 5. It's run on a play and stay basis, and parents or carers are encouraged to join in with their children. A range of open-ended materials like sand, water, mud, blocks, paint, etc. are freely available to enable independent and active learning and long, uninterrupted, rich and sensory play. Sessions provide children with unlimited access to the garden, with freedom to actively explore and play according to their preferences and individual needs and abilities. We encourage children to grow, learn and work together, from planting a single seed to designing and caring for an entire bed of plants. The project aims to harness children's eagerness and natural curiosity, encouraging them to grow and taste a variety of produce in our planting zones. We enable children to experience and understand the cycle of growth across all of the seasons, and are creating photo diaries across the year to demonstrate how the garden changes. Indoor spaces provide opportunity to continue exploration and creativity. This includes polytunnels, work sheds, and the purpose-built learning hubs. Play zones encourage action and imagination, incorporating sandpits, giant tyre climbing balls, seesaws, wooden racing cars, tyre rockers, building blocks, all either donated or created by volunteers from unwanted, donated or recycled materials. Our mud kitchens and water walls enhance sensory experiences further, and wildlife zones are home to a variety of mini beasts, frogs, newts and chickens, allowing children to meet, explore and care for creatures in natural habitats. Mini Muddy Fingers takes place every Tuesday and Thursday. Obviously, due to COVID, the delivery of the project hasn't gone quite as we planned. However, in the time we have been operational, we've had some real achievements. With over 90 children registered, we've achieved an average attendance of 9 per session so far, with some days having over 20 children coming to the site. This is extremely positive, especially when taking into account the local and national lockdowns, restrictions and social distancing measures having to be implemented across the site over the last year. During each session, every child provided feedback on their feelings using emoji sheets, and this feedback has confirmed that 98% of children felt happy when they attended the garden. Nothing but positive feedback has also been received from parents and carers. When we first meet the children, we talk to them and their parents or carers and observe them very carefully to try to understand how they think and where they're starting from. We can then recognise and evidence developments that are taking place through ongoing observations of their interactions with the garden. Observations have documented some of the positive participation and learning that has taken place during the project. We've seen our families try new things together and develop new skills outdoors. An example of one of our successes was a young boy that joined Mini Muddy Fingers with his mum and was initially very nervous. He'd never been to a place like the garden before and was very shy. We established that before coming to the project, he wasn't yet taking part in any imaginative play, pretend play or imitating life. He could move things but wasn't yet doing so as part of play and was only seen doing repetitive actions a little at a time. After just 3 sessions at the garden, we saw a significant change in him. Each time he attended, he became more and more comfortable with the environment and was keen to be involved in all aspects of the garden. He developed an interest in gardening and was fascinated by the growing crops, exploring plants and vegetables across the site through touch. By the 3rd session, we observed him sitting playing in the soil. He was using garden tools to move soil from one position to another repetitively. He then picked up a watering can and carried on playing, pretending he was watering plants in his piles of soil, giggling and laughing throughout. This demonstrates how the garden has developed an understanding of nature for a child of a very young age. The environment has encouraged creative and imaginative play based on imitating what he has witnessed as part of the project. The garden's natural environment has benefits for health and well-being and encourages physical activity. Additionally, as an outdoor accessible space during COVID, the garden has proved to be a lifeline for our families and also our volunteers that have still been able to attend. The garden has provided a safe and secure place to enjoy the outdoors, have fun and learn. Social value and community cohesion is important to us. The garden and the team are completely embedded into the wider community. The feedback we've received from our attendees, both children and adults, confirms there's a real sense of community for those that attend. We try to work in nurturing partnerships with the children, with their families, and with each other at all times. Another example of one of our successes is a young girl that regularly visits the garden. She has some physical disabilities and attends the garden with her grandmother, who has custody of her and her sisters. They don't have a garden at home. She quickly developed a love of the outdoors, and she attends every session whatever the weather. Her enthusiasm and passion for the garden is passed on to other children and adults as she encourages them to be involved and to explore the garden with her. She has a keen interest in every aspect of the garden, particularly growing and harvesting crops and caring for wildlife, and she's learned how to grow vegetables from seeds and how to pick them when ready, taking them home for her and her family to enjoy. At every session, she makes sure she feeds the chickens. She knows what food they can have and has learned how to handle them correctly. She also enjoys finding bugs and insects across the garden and has thoroughly enjoyed watching them in our bug hotel. She was keen to have mini beasts of her own, so she built a house for them at her own home, mimicking what she'd seen at the garden and putting into practice all the things that she'd learned. Through her experiences at the garden, she's developed a desire to nurture all nature and has an understanding and knowledge of life cycles and the elements needed to care for both plants and animals. So what does the future hold? Obviously, our first priority is to be able to open our garden gates again and allow safe access to all of our local families. Within our original project plan, we were committed to facilitating celebrations of all of the children's achievements at the garden. This was to be co-designed and delivered with the children themselves. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened as yet, largely due to the impact of COVID and the minimal levels of operational activity, but it is something that we're still planning. Our established relationships with the children and their families and carers will enable us to do this, and hopefully at some point over the next few months, we can put on an event that will meet the design and the desires that the children describe to us, to really acknowledge them being part of the garden and the achievements they've made. Ultimately, the experience that has been shared with the children attending the garden have been positive and enriching on both sides. Our beneficiaries have been intergenerational, and learning is happening from all sides and across all ages. We wish to continue with the project as long as possible, continuously developing and adapting to children's needs and ideas for as long as we're able to. If we can sustain the project, we aim to use our development skills of observation and reflection to continue to evolve not only the experiences we offer, but also the physical aspects of the garden. We already have examples of previous beneficiaries of the garden coming back as parents with their own children, and we hope that this legacy can continue into the future. We also hope we can continue to work in partnership with the Froebel Trust and look at ways that we can all develop to shape a better future for the children of the garden, not only in South Tyneside, but across numerous different locations. I hope I've managed to demonstrate the passion, the commitment and the devotion that everyone involved has for the garden and the benefits that this has had on our local community. This is how the garden has grown, the commitment given to just one basic allotment plot in a housing estate, and the sharing of ideas and knowledge has developed it into what you see today. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our story. I will be available to answer any questions you may have, or at least try to at the end of the session. But for now, I know Kate will talk a little bit more from her perspective.
Thank you very much, Louise. That was such an exciting project and some wonderful images. And thank you for bearing with us with the technology problems there. But let's move on to Kate Razzall, who worked with Louise on the project. So Kate will just speak for 10 minutes. So over to you,
okay.
Kate.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Helen. And thank you, Louise, for showing us some of the passion and the commitment of the volunteers in the garden and for giving us some context. I want to describe the impact delivering the short course training had on us as the tutors, by whom I mean not only me, but my partner tutor, Dr. Stella Louis. Louise has talked about how the garden is intuitively Froebelian. I just want to flesh that out a little. Firstly, it's abundantly evident that it's rooted in the community, with intergenerational families using the garden from the tiniest tot onwards. It's used by people with disabilities and people from different cultural and ethnic backgrounds. It's also clear that it's a very nurturing place where people learn from each other to acquire new skills. The staff are sensitive to the needs of the community, as Louise has outlined, and are constantly on hand to support children's explorations by offering guidance on how to use and care for equipment. The garden itself provides space for large and small gatherings and places for people to be by themselves. It encourages children to observe at first hand the habits and habitats of animals and plants, and to follow life cycles from seed or egg onwards. Meaningful first-hand experiences of growing and caring for both plants and animals are abundant, and children experience not only life cycles of individual plants and animals, but also something of the regenerative cycle of nature, as you see waste plant matter being recycled into compost. They work with wood felled from trees growing on the site, or they watch beetles scuffling around in rotting tree stumps. As Froebel himself said, the child who's cared for another living thing is more easily led to care for his own life. One of the very clear messages from the allotmenteers is their acknowledgement of their reliance and their need for the garden, in contrast to many early years practitioners who see the outdoors or nature as one of those things to be ticked off in the midst of all the demands upon them. In this, the allotmenteers appear to be closer to Froebel, who saw nature as the ultimate teacher, providing evidence of the natural laws by which we're all governed. When Stella and I first met the allotmenteers, it's no exaggeration to say that they were terrified. The words rabbits, frozen, headlights come to mind. They were at the NECA headquarters, stuck in a meeting room full of tables and chairs and whiteboards, well outside their comfort zone. Day one, element one, was quite a challenge. But when I look back to the 4 days we spent with the allotmenteers, I can see some significant turning points. One was retelling very briefly the story of Froebel's early life. Up until this point, I'd always thought that this was no more than putting Froebel in some sort of historical context. With the allotmenteers, I can see that this human story helped them to see that Froebel had known real hardship and suffering in his early life, and that he spoke to their condition. He was not just some remote dead German from 200 years ago. At the time, I sensed a change in the atmosphere in the room. I could almost feel them sitting up to take notice. They felt that Froebel had their backs. To me, this emphasizes the need for educators to allow people to find meaningful connections to make any learning relevant. Perhaps the most important turning point for us was hearing the allotmenteers talking with passion and pride about the garden. We asked them to take us there. The car journey was very revealing. It was so obvious that Dave and his team were very well known in the community, with people in the street waving and smiling when they saw Dave as we drove past. Once we arrived on the site, the allotmenteers were transformed into the confident and passionate, enthusiastic experts you would have seen in the presentation, justifiably proud of their garden and what it stands for. This transformation reveals the basic importance of starting from where the learner is, as Froebelians put it. In this case, we were quite literally in the place for our learners to shine and to show us their amazing strengths and gifts. Isn't that what educators should always do? Organise settings so they can really highlight the strengths of their learners. Setting is such a powerful word when you consider that jewellers for centuries have created settings for their gems, which highlight each gem's brilliance and qualities. After this, it was obvious that any further input from Stella and me could only take place in the garden, and we taught the whole of element 3, engaging with nature, in the garden. As we had no electricity, we had to rethink our approach, which then developed into another turning point. We asked the allotmenteers to be like Froebel, to go out into the garden, to get down and dirty with what was there, to observe, to notice, to wonder, to really look and pay attention. Above all, to be like the young Froebel, immersed in the forest as a young child. As a focus, we provided them with a chart from an unlikely source, this book. And this chart here shows the stem and stalk shapes That chart reminded me very strongly of the second gift, which we'll come on to. We watch the allotmenteers using language to observe, to describe, to compare, to contrast, to explain, to measure, to hypothesize, just as real scientists would, and just as we as educators should be encouraging young children to do. The allotmenteers grew in stature and confidence. They took photos on their phones. They enlarged them to look more closely at specific features. They debated and discussed with each other. They were excited and delighted to find examples of these shapes literally at their feet. And where they couldn't find anything, they turned to the internet on their phones. They probably never thought of themselves as mathematicians or scientists, but listening to them, we could see that they were engaging in real mathematical and scientific debate. Now, we had spoken with the allotmenteers a little earlier about Froebel's law of opposites, the fact that it's impossible to know about, for example, an attribute unless you also know something about its opposite. The garden provided so many examples of this, even on a very cold March day. And the allotmenteers could not stop finding pairs of opposites: open and shut daffodils, frozen and liquid water, curled and straight leaves, long and short branches, hard and soft surfaces. The list could go on. They used this to think about and enrich their provision in the mud kitchen, an area they were in the process of developing. They started to discuss how children would need open and closed cupboards, high and low shelves, wet and dry areas, and they started to think about children's language development when they were using the mud kitchen. They also planned to include guttering and a water butt in the mud kitchen, which to them was of key importance. They wanted children to understand where rain comes from and what happens to it, which links back to the garden's green sustainable agenda. They're very aware that they're handing on the gift of nature to young children, and that one of the best ways to do this is to encourage children to understand what they might otherwise have taken for granted, in this case, rain, and to see it as an asset. I just want to be a little technical here and refer to Froebel's gifts and occupations. I'm sure you'll be familiar with these, but in case you're not, the Froebel Trust has lots of information on its website. On a personal note, the impact of taking Froebel's gifts outside has been considerable. I also began to think about taking Froebel's occupations outside. For example, I could see that seed heads linked to stick and pea work, patterns on tree bark linked to parquetry, bare branches against the sky linked to stickling, and so on. It's evidence for me of the way in which observations of the natural world deeply influenced Froebel's thinking, and of the way in which the visible world reveals the deep inner structures of nature. I've since been involved in delivering Element 1 in another setting, and as a result of working with this garden outside so much, we've spent much more time outdoors looking at the gifts and occupations, again with similar results: delight, excitement and wonder from the participants. Such close observation of nature seems to have taught them something new and thrilling about the natural world at their feet, something they want to share with their children. Louise has talked about the impact of the training on the allotmenteers. Listening to the allotmenteers, it's clear from their language they have a new appreciation of the role of movement in developing young children's thinking. They talk about watching children crawling through willow tunnels, moving in and out and around. They've evidently developed new respect for the garden as a learning environment in its own right. I'm delighted that one of the main impacts of the training has been an emphasis on observation. The allotmenteers now trust children to explore and initiate their own learning, seeing their own role as being thoughtful, supportive observers, trying to understand what children are showing them of their inner world. There could be nothing more Froebelian than that. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you, Kate. That's a really interesting addition to hearing about the project and to get your insights and the links with Froebel.